morning. I'm your host Deepthi Harbani and I welcome you to the data security track of the TechCon virtual conclave presented by the Economic Times. At the onset, we would like to express our gratitude and appreciation to our esteemed partners. Our presenting partner, Dell Technologies. Our platinum partners, Tata Communication, Commvault, IBM, Logitech, NetApp, Hitachi Systems Microclinic, and Hitachi Vantara. Our gold partners, Juniper Networks, Exclusive Networks, Tenable, Zoom, Amazon Internet Services, Automation Anywhere, and Redington. Our associate partners, Cloudera, More Engage, and Samsung SDS. Our supporting association, the Data Security Council of India. Our media partners, Analytics Insight and Silicon India. Ladies and gentlemen, in this track, we shall discuss security post the new normal. Defending an enterprise against an attack is hard enough, but defending one where the majority of employees are remote is even harder. The transition from an office to home was a challenging process for businesses across the globe. Security exists to enable, but people are not machines, and sudden changes to habits and workflows can cause difficulty. Thus, security needs to become somewhat fluid, adapting to the needs of the people it's defending. As the world went into lockdown in 2020, the criminals did too. This means they needed to shift their operations somewhat and start targeting workers who were at home rather than in the office. Criminals adopted new phishing lures, many of them focusing on COVID-19, targeting VPN credentials, video conferencing applications, and personal information, which was used for financial and benefit fraud. One of the lessons learned in 2020 is that the usual way of protection will work to a degree, but security must adapt rapidly to changing situations. Just because a policy or program works great in a data center and office doesn't mean it will work when everyone has to go home. The forced changes in 2020 were a blunt reminder of this fact. Thus, the data security track will focus its efforts to paint a roadmap for businesses and other experts to build a resilient, future-proof digital security strategy. So look forward to an eventful day as we bring to you enriching sessions, insights from industry leaders, and engaging discussions. You may also visit our partner booths at the Experience Zone and do fill up the feedback form at all the partner booths so that you can gain points on the leaderboard and win exciting Amazon vouchers. You may visit the networking lounge to network and interact with co-attendees. And yes, do share your comments, views and tweets on social media using the hashtag ETDataCon. Stay tuned, we'll be back shortly with our keynote address. Welcome to the opening keynote. Post the new normal. By 2023, 75% of organizations, the widespread adoption of advanced technologies to running the business while protecting against security threats and preventing data breaches and other enterprise cybersecurity threats. This session will unravel the real challenges of cybersecurity as businesses look to tune themselves for growth in a rapidly evolving digital world. And to render the opening keynote, I welcome Paul O'Rourke, Global Cyber Leader and Managing Director Partner. Yes, Paul, over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Very pleased to be with you here today. Really keen to talk through both the opportunity and challenge that the data protection world represents for all of us today. As I was reflecting on this, the famous quote from Einstein came to mind, and that is, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. In many ways, that can sum up the cyber industry. It can sum up how we've approached it, the challenges, the solutions, the capabilities, everything that we've built in cyber has been doing the same thing over and over. And we've expected a different result. Well, 2020 showed us that we need a different approach. The challenges from 2020 in terms of displaced workers, people working from home, different organizational challenges, the impact of much greater cyber challenges and attacks has presented a very unique opportunity for us to really redefine how we look at data protection and security. So really today, I want to go through two things. I want to look at the future of success in the marketplace around data protection and privacy. Post the new normal, in a post-COVID world, how can organizations thrive? But before we do that, we really need to reflect on what's wrong today. There's a lot of logos on this slide, and really it's just a snapshot of really the evolution and the growth we've seen in cyber attacks over the last roughly 10 years. There's a few key aspects that really probably redefine the pre-COVID and post-COVID world. In a post-COVID world, we've seen much more targeted attacks, much more big name brands attacked, very pervasive attacks where the attackers are very structured, it's organized crime, it's very targeted on organizations, and we're seeing three major impacts. We're seeing operational impacts, we're seeing financial impacts, and increasingly we're seeing regulatory impacts. And overlaying all of this is reputational damage. The growth of these attacks really redefines how we need to look at cyber, how we need to look at our whole approach to it, and more importantly, what's wrong. I said before, Einstein calling out doing things over and over, expecting a different result. If we don't redefine, if we don't do something differently, then I could extrapolate this for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and we'll probably just see bigger logos, bigger attacks, and greater impacts in the market. And just in the last probably 6 months, and I've been in cyber for over 20 years, I've never seen so many major cyber attacks and sustained impacts on organizations globally. And so on the right-hand side there, really calling out what are some of the systemic things that are driving these attacks. Obviously, we've seen industrial organized crime really move into this space in the last 3 to 4 years, but very much in a post-COVID world, particularly in a displaced workers environment. But we've also seen nation-state attacks, very structured, very targeted, and very successful attacks, and quite a few high prominent ones over the last, probably 6 to 8 months. We've seen SolarWinds, we've seen Colonial Pipeline recently, we've seen JBS in the market as well. Obviously, the second point here, ransomware is the topical issue. It's very complex, and I'll explore in a couple of slides why we're failing on ransomware and what really the challenge around this one is. In the past, what we have seen is really cyber attacks impacting internal systems, financial systems, but rarely did it have a downstream operational impact. So one of the big things we've seen in the market now is the whole operational outages. And this, I think, is probably will characterize, if we don't do something differently, the biggest challenge in cyber in the next few years. And that is a cyber attack having a downstream impact, or what we call cyber amplified attack, amplified into other areas of the business. It could be operational outages, it could be impacting for a bank, credit worthiness, credit book, credit lending, various other areas. And so there's much more, well, a heightened focus in terms of what we need to do, because it's not just a cyber attack, it's the actual operational impact on businesses. Obviously, in a post-COVID world, we've seen a heightened increase in fraud risk. Fraud's gone up significantly. Globally, we've seen sustained fraud attacks, but we've also seen the advent of a lot of new fraud attacks, and obviously ransomware is one of the big ones in the market at the moment. I just touched on before the operational impacts, and I think this is one that's really characterizing the challenge for boards and executives. In my role, I spend a lot of time with boards and executives globally, and probably the one big change we've seen in cyber in a post-COVID world is that the executives and board have taken ownership over cyber. And to be honest, they have to. It's a top 3 enterprise risk for nearly all organizations. And so organizations are much more focused now at an executive level on what we have to do around it. They're very focused on the operational impact. What could a cyber attack do to the operational stability of my business? And I think this is one of the success factors I'll talk about a bit later, in terms of that the buy-in from the executives is a key ingredient for success going forward. And overlaying all of these challenges is we have a global deficit of cyber talent. There's roughly about 3+ million open cyber roles globally that are currently not filled. And this situation, despite sustained efforts by governments, universities, and other institutions over the past 3 to 4 years, the situation year on year continues to get worse. It might seem fairly intuitive what I have on this slide. You can't manage what you don't measure, but in some ways this does sum up cyber. And I just want to explore this in a bit more detail. We're focused very much, and I think in a lot of cases, on the wrong areas of cyber. There is far too much money today going to just technology. Technology is absolutely key. It's a core component of the problem. It's an absolutely core component of the fix, of the solution. And I think this is where a lot of organizations haven't really fully understood that the risk impact on their business and the downstream operational risk that they face. And I use the word risk because that's basically what it is. It's an enterprise risk. If we focus it purely from a security view, from a controls view and a security view, we'll increasingly struggle to protect. And going back to the analogy before, that's what we've done for the last 10 years, focused very much on security controls, buying new technology, upgrading to the latest technology. Absolutely core component, but it's only part of the solution. The key advice I give to organizations, and the key message I probably want to get across today, is that we need to approach this from a risk perspective, and we need to really measure where the risk is in the business. It might seem intuitive that most organizations know where the risk is, but to be honest, most organizations don't. It's only when you get into a proper risk management approach, assessment, methodologies, frameworks, and quantification that you can actually understand where the risk is. I get a question a lot from boards and executives, how much more money should we spend on cyber to fix the problem? I do a lot in this space in terms of quantification and really looking at the risk perspective. Nearly always, organizations are spending the right amount of money, or quite often spending too much money in cyber. They're just spending it in the wrong areas. And this is where we start to understand, well, where is the risk in the business? What do we need to do differently? And so if we do something differently, how can we manage going forward? So if we start to measure the right risks and manage those risks, and the executive helps govern those risks, again, this is a recipe for success for the organizations in the future. One of the big problems we've got in the market is that there's a whole digitization effort going on by pretty well every major organization globally. Obviously, COVID has accelerated this digital effort. but in some ways we haven't effectively integrated cyber and privacy into digital. Even before COVID, there was a lot of initiatives that didn't have cyber appropriately built in. There was no embedded cyber, there's no integrated cyber, and often cyber or controls or security or privacy were afterthoughts. They weren't embedded up front. And what we're seeing today, off the back of a lot of these digital initiatives, is this is where a lot of the attacks are coming from. This is a lot of the success in the market in terms of the breaches, in terms of the fraud, is because systems have been built, deployed, and rolled out that didn't have effective security built in. And this gets to the heart of a problem and part of the solution as well. And that is the role of cyber with the business. Cyber traditionally has been a very side area in a lot of organizations, not well integrated with the digital function, definitely not well integrated with the risk function or executive. And really, as we look at success, we have to really redefine the role of cyber. Where does cyber report? And really, what are those ingredients that really set an organization up for success in managing and governing, which is increasingly becoming a top 3, if not the top and number 1 risk for most organizations. Just the second last slide on the problem statement. Yeah, I just put this one up because I think it's interesting context around compliance. And often in cyber, we use different words. We're talking compliance, we're talking privacy, we're talking security, we're talking controls. The problem I have is not with the regulatory compliance. I think this is a key element of success. I think part of the problem here is organizations spending too much money on their compliance. Compliance does not mean secure. And so there's a real opportunity for organizations as they start to redefine how can we do things differently in a post-COVID world? How can we better manage our cyber, our security, and our privacy? And that is to streamline and automate a lot of this. A lot of this, again, this is not about saying let's decrease cyber spending. This is about saying let's get the best allocation of funds. And so within an organization spending funds, if we can take out areas that are non-effective in really driving streamlined management of cyber, we get much better control around the management and governance of cyber. And so organizations that are really successful are saying we obviously have to be compliant, we have to be 100% addressing our regulatory compliance, but we don't need to do this with such a large portion of our budget. We can automate it, we can streamline it. In some cases, we can use third parties to help manage it. It decreases the cost, but most importantly, it frees up capacity within the cyber areas and the security functions to better manage the risks in their business. And again, I just reiterate, compliant does not mean secure. And a lot of organizations spend too much of the focus on compliance thinking that one equals the other, as in regulatory compliance equals security. So what does success look like in the new normal? I've spent a bit of time talking about what's wrong, but really as we start to look at what does success look like, what are those elements that really drive a much more successful organization managing and governing cyber? First and foremost, I think it's integrated cyber. We can't have cyber or security function being separate from the business, separate from the digital enablement, separate from the initiatives going forward. There's a lot of talk in organizations about DevSecOps and integrating cyber, but to be honest, not a lot of success in those areas. And I think part of the problem is the way cyber is viewed, but I also think part of the problem is the cyber organizations themselves and the security functions not being the right advocates for what's really needed. And so as I advise a lot of organizations, I talk about advocacy as a big aspect. And that is that the role of the security function is to be the advocate. It's not to be the blocker. And to be honest, that's what they're seen in a lot of organizations. They're seen as the function that says, you can't do this, you shouldn't do this, it's going to cost more, it will take extra time. That to me, that's not the role of cyber. That the role of cyber is to fully understand, or the role of security function is to fully understand the business strategy, to be integrated in the business strategy, and to be an advocate for those aspects that are absolutely required to manage and govern cyber and really manage the risk. I always talk about cyber enablement or security enablement when I'm talking around the role of the function, because I think that the word here is enablement, that the security area needs to change its brand, needs to change the way it's perceived, and I think enablement is part of that success. And that is redefining that the role of cyber is not to say you can't do it. There's nearly always a way you can do something, unless it goes against regulation or legislation. There's nearly always a way it can happen, but it's the perception and the approach that the security areas take can actually redefine how they're perceived and the brand and how well they're integrated. And organisations that do a really good job in this space actually make sure that the person leading the function is a really strong advocate for growth, that they really understand the business strategy, integrated into the business strategy, and are actually there around the enablement function, really helping enable that business strategy in a secure way. The second one, and it's really tied into the first one, is digitisation. If we don't start to fix this problem, it is going to the downstream impact will be significant in the next few years. And that is, the more we deploy digital solutions, capabilities, offerings, and marketplaces that don't have the right controls, security, and privacy built in, it just opens up the door for more attackers. We've seen a significant increase, over 55% of attacks and over 70% in terms of financial impact in a post-COVID world in terms of losses. The organised crime aspect of cyber is becoming very successful. The more we don't counter that with the right capabilities, solutions, and building the right marketplaces, the problem will only get worse. But organisations, this is not a difficult one to solve. This is actually really tying 1 and 2 together and making sure that we really integrate these two very closely, and cyber becomes a core part of the business and an absolutely integral part of the digital strategy and enablement. And the last one, I spoke about this before. I said that we spend often too much money on technology and we expect that to be the answer. Over 55% of attacks, and the major attacks in the last year post-COVID, have been through the people element of cyber. Only 23% today are actually technology-related attacks in terms of technology vulnerabilities. And so with a lot of the money going just to the technology aspect, it's no wonder that we're actually not fixing this problem. So the attackers have got very smart. They've understood that organisations have got much better at technology. They've invested in controls. They've invested in really good capability. And so the attackers quite simply have, it's just the weakest link. They've moved to the weakest link, and the weakest link is the people. And I think this is an area of huge opportunity, but also the most complex one, because obviously with the people element, there's no technology controls you can intuitively put in and expect a magic result. This is about education. It's about awareness. It's about educating not only the organisation, but also the supply chain, and making sure that all elements are fully aware of the risks and fully aware of the consequences of their actions. I spoke before about the opportunity here around being fully integrated at a digital layer and having cyber a core component. A lot of the pushback I hear from organisations, particularly chief digital officers and others, is, we have imperatives in the market, we have a competitive landscape, we need to move faster. I think there's a strong perception and a strong view that cyber actually doesn't enable this. And to be honest, in a lot of functions, that's 100% true, but it doesn't have to be this at all. And I think this is the real, to me, tragedy in cyber, that we've got to a position of security functions not having the right brand, not having the right enablement, not having the right messaging, definitely not having the right metrics and reporting to the executives, that's really not enabling digital strategies. If we're to make organisations or enable organisations to move faster, the key component here is really starting to look at cyber in a different context and starting to say, well, what could we do differently? We've obviously got huge challenges in the market in terms of of the COVID world, in terms of displaced workforce, in terms of accelerated digitization. There's a lot of challenges out there, but the fixes aren't that hard either. But to be honest, there's not a lot of organizations doing this well. I said before, I get a lot of questions around how much money should we spend on cyber. I can honestly say that money is not the panacea. It's not the absolute answer here. If it was, then I can guarantee you the largest organizations in this world, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Microsoft, Sony, and others who've all experienced cyber breaches, would not happen. Yes, money is part of the answer, but only to a degree. And I think this is where a lot of organizations are struggling with is, what do we need to do differently around cyber? I would say money is not in the top three for me. Money is an element. I think technology is core, but part of it too is about adopting some really innovative and new capabilities. Looking at blockchain in a really interesting way, going back and re-looking at how we do digital certificates and really getting much more focused on the right controls. But to me, the top two, the first one is, let's really redefine how we look at cyber. Let's do it from a risk perspective, not just a security perspective. Let's change the whole methodologies, approach, focus around cyber, and make sure we have a much greater focus around understanding the risks, making sure we invest the right money around those risks, and then managing and governing the risks. And the second one for me is around the people and the executive. And to me, this is a key element of success. And I said before that, a lot of organizations, cyber is not seen in the right light. And we've seen a strategic shift in the market where the executives really are the owners and the governors now of cyber. If so, then as a cyber industry, as cyber professionals and as organizations, we need to really redefine the engagement with the executive, the engagement with the board, and the engagement with the regulators in those organizations in regulated industries. How do we start to message very differently the role of cyber, the role of controls, the role of privacy in a post-COVID world? It's very challenging. It's not going away. If we don't change things, and I touched on this before, it's only going to get worse. But it doesn't have to. And I think that's probably the really sobering thought here is, if we do something really well, if we change it, we can be really successful. But if we don't, it will get worse. And one of the other big challenges for those that are in operational technology industries, mining organizations, utilities, manufacturing plants, etc., that run both IT and OT, this represents the next iteration of challenge we have in the market. Everything I've spoken here around the challenges around cyber have primarily been around the IT function. But we've got a looming risk in the market, which is very large in terms of the operational technology. What if a cyber attack has a downstream impact on an electricity grid and brings down the grid? What if it has impact on utilities, on telecommunication providers, on the automation in a factory? These are huge issues, and it's compounded as well by the deployment of industrial IoT. In no way am I saying that we shouldn't be deploying these capabilities. Again, they're part of the solution. They're absolutely key for organizations to deploy them, key to be competitive in the market, key to drive out costs and drive revenue and drive competitiveness. But if we don't redefine the role of cyber in these functions and appropriately design cyber from first principles we'll be in exactly the same problem statement around the operational technology as we are in IT today. And so as we start to really redefine the landscape and the forward view of cyber, we're at a really interesting pivot in the market, and COVID's really redefined that pivot for us. The attackers have got greater, the losses have got greater, the brands that are being attacked have got more significant. And so it's a really interesting time for us to stop and say, what can we, but probably more importantly, what should we do differently? And what are those elements of success? If we define it from a risk perspective, if we drive a much greater integrated cyber, if we start to report in language that the business understands, not in cyber terminology, the executive, the board and others, they don't need to know all the detail. They need to know that the difference here is content and context. the role here is really to help to help the executive and boards understand cyber risk context, the role that cyber could do in enabling the business, in protecting the business, in driving the digital enablement, and very much in protecting the assets in a context that they understand. And it's really taking out a lot of the terminology, it's taking out the taxonomy, and a lot of the buzzwords that are used in cyber should not be used. What we have to start to do is really redefine cyber in both a business and digital context, and importantly, in a financial context. The most important thing I see in terms of organisations that really do this well is that the reporting to the executive and board gives a really strong business and digital context around enablement and protection, but also gives a really strong financial context. And that is, it can actually start to characterise, if we do have a breach, the impact is likely to cost us between $60 and $80 million. It's real. The organisation, the executive, the board can actually see in dollar terms, this is real. And they can start making very different decisions around how they approach cyber, how they approach cyber and security and data privacy in a post-COVID world. But most importantly, it changes the whole perception and role of the security function, and really helps organisations really mature their whole approach to understanding the problem, managing the problem, and governing the problem. And one of the slides before gave the context around you can't manage what you don't measure. And just as summing up today, I think that's where most organisations are at today. They have great intentions, they're well funded, and it's usually not been a problem for most organisations to fund cyber. But if that was the case, if funding was available and we could get the resources and we could buy the tools and technology, why is the problem getting worse? And I think that really characterises, I think, a lightning bolt moment for a lot of organisations when they realise that we fundamentally can't keep doing what we're doing. We have to redefine our approach. We have to rethink the whole role of cyber, of the people, of our supply chain, around our enablement, our digital approach, and make very different decisions going forward. And I think organisations that do that really will be successful. And the last point I'd make is elevating cyber up in the organisation is an element of success that some of the organisations that have redefined it have actually really done well. And that is start to take the security or control, privacy and cyber organisation out of the IT function in a lot of organisation, elevate it up. And I think major organisations now in North America, I think 40% now report that the cyber leader now reports into the CEO. And so, 3 years ago, that was sub 10%. And so we've seen a whole redefining of the role of cyber, the role of security and the role of privacy in a post-COVID world. And again, COVID does represent that pivot for us. We don't have to keep doing what we've done in the past. We don't have to be at the whim of all the attackers and the losses and the financial impacts and reputational impacts. We have a real opportunity in the market in a post-COVID world to redefine the role of cyber, the role of technology, and the role of people and process in really redressing the cyber issue. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Paul, for sharing your valuable thoughts with us. To all our attendees and delegates, remember to download your digital certificates of participation. The icon is at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to share your thoughts and comments on the signature wall. You may also visit our partner booths at the Experience Zone. And do fill up the feedback form at all the partner booths in order to gain points on the leaderboard and win exciting Amazon vouchers. You may visit the networking lounge to network and interact with co-attendees. And yes, do share your comments, views and tweets on social media with the hashtag ETDataCon. Meanwhile, join us for our next session, Keynote on the role of data and AI in security innovation, coming up shortly.